last Sunday, I started a series called Faith That Works. And last week we talked about the storms of life and the fact that Jesus goes with us in those storms. Today I'm going to talk about something a little bit different. But as I begin, I want to tell you a couple stories real quick. One, I remember several years ago, I was visiting with a husband and wife couple out in a foyer at church. And as I was visiting with them, another lady came up and she started to, well, she greeted the lady. And then she saw her husband and says, "Hey, looks like you need a hug." And we were all three standing there. So she gives the lady a hug. She says to the guy, "Looks like you need a hug," and gave him a hug. And I'm standing right here ready I like hugs too. And as I'm standing there, she basically didn't even look my way. And it was a weird, uncomfortable feeling because she just expressed love and appreciation to them. But to me, it was just kind of like, okay. I walked away. It was a very different feeling. And you know, sometimes she probably didn't even think about it, but we see people whom we know and love, and we tend to go to them and hey, and we may have another person that's there. But just a reminder to myself, it makes me very much so want to greet everybody, not to hug everybody, but to be aware that, you know, you just have to be careful. Because it wasn't a very good feeling. I remember a time when a pastor, would come in, and it was his ritual, which he would do every Sunday, and he'd walk all the way down, as church was 2 minutes to start. He'd walk all the way down, say he'd come up here, and he would sit in the front row. And then there was usually someone who sat up there close, and he would always greet them and give them a hug. I kind of noticed that, and I think some other people did as well. And one of the things that happened is someone said, "Well, I guess we know where we stand." And it was because, you know, they were there and he would hug them and that kind of thing. But he went past 25 people to get where he's at, but not once acknowledged them, greeted them, or said anything. And that's just an observation. Now, I do my best, and I think you know that, and I do this on purpose. I do it because I love every one of you. You all matter to me. And I want to do my best not to make you ever feel like I have felt before or other people felt before. Everyone here, no matter if this is your first Sunday here or if you've been here all your life, you know what? You matter. You matter to me, you matter to God, you matter to Jesus, but you matter. And I want you to know that. I love you, and I'm grateful to be your pastor and a friend. We're going to talk about plain favorites. You probably have never heard anything like this today, but I think it's very vital in our lives, and that's the thought, plain favorites. James, in the New Testament, is probably one of the most practical and yet direct books that is in the New Testament. So I would say today, fasten your seatbelts, because we're going to look at a section today that is going to be not tough, but it's really going to hopefully help us. He's going to come after us. He's going to come after me. He's going to come after you in a way that maybe we need to grow. If you have sermon notes, you're welcome to use them. If there are distractions, place them off to the side. James 2, verse 1 says, "My dear brothers and sisters," now notice it's brothers and sisters. "How can you claim that you have faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ if you favor some people more than others?" I mean, it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear what James says here. And then Romans 2, verse 11 says, "For God does not show favoritism." I want you to circle the word favoritism there. And in James 2:1, if you're using notes, I want you to underline favor some people more than others. See, there's a little bit of a secret here that I think takes place in everybody's life. I believe that almost all of us go around with an unpublished list of names of those people or kinds of people that we tend to like, or a list of those people that we would just kind of like not to do anything with. We have our list of desirables and we have our list of undesirables. Now, of course, we don't talk about this kind of stuff. But I believe that most of us would have a hard time admitting to ourselves that I have favorites. I show partiality with the people that I react with. But I believe that it's true nonetheless. Some of us, if the truth were known, would admit to having the same kind of problem that James is addressing to the people in his day. Matter of fact, let me give you an idea, an example. If I were to say today that we're going to take a bus all the way to Indianapolis, and we're going to go see Bubba the Bone. How many of you want to go? I probably wouldn't get too many takers to go with me. But if I said, hey, we're going to take a bus, and we're going to go over and see Larry Bird. We're going to get autographs, I think I would get a whole busload of people and say, let's go talk to Larry Bird. It's just a thing. It's happened back in Jesus' day, and it happens today that for some reason we prefer to be around rich people rather than poor. And in fact, some of us are annoyed by the poor, and some of us try to insulate ourselves from those people who are poor if possible. Now, I've been, and I know some of you may have been as well, in the academic setting. And some people who are very, academia people in the college setting, it's all about, the masters, the doctors, what classes did you take? And it's like, I always felt uncomfortable with that. But I was talking to someone in Florida who was a professor at a seminary. We got to talking, and he said, did you go to seminary? I said, no, I went to a 4-year Bible college. And as soon as I said, no, I didn't go to seminary, guess what? And he started talking to this guy over here, and for the rest of the time, he pretty much ignored me. And I felt like I don't matter. That's how it felt. And it's just, some people, they would rather prefer to be with educated people. Because, maybe you haven't gotten too far in your educational or academic pursuits. See, some of us would rather be with white-collar people instead of blue-collar people. But interestingly enough, some people prefer to be with blue-collar people because they have a strong distrust or a dislike of anyone who works as a white-collar or managerial kind of job. Even by how positioned we are at work, people have their likes and dislikes. There's another one. What about thin people? Some people would rather be around people that are thin than those that are a little bit more overweight or even obese. And I don't know if you've seen this. I don't know if it was 2020 or 2020 Dateline. I remember seeing this, and maybe you can, but it's been a few years ago. They had a lady who was very thin and nice looking, and she came in and they put on all the stuff that they do for the movies to make them look big. And they put on this makeup and they put stuff so her cheeks were bigger, and put stuff in her clothes so she just looked bigger. And she went out with these cameras, like undercover, and greeted these different people and was treated one way. And then she goes back and takes all that stuff off and goes out again. And guess what? She says, did people treat you differently by how I looked? Absolutely. Because people have their likes and dislikes just even on the way people look. Now we could get into skin color. It's kind of like there's the whites and then there's everybody else. Some of us have feelings that we would not want to make public when it comes to preferences regarding a skin color. But sometimes we tell jokes at the expense of certain ethnic groups. And we tell that joke, and there's a reason why we're telling it. And we kind of laugh about it. We laugh with that person. And it's kind of like we've all kind of always done that. But no matter what kinds of people we like or dislike or we are drawn to in this, don't kid yourself about this. James says we all have our favorite kinds of people. And instead of acknowledging these preferences as human and that's acceptable, James is saying to us, friends, this stuff must be exposed. This stuff must be repented of. This stuff must be transformed from the inside by the love of God. And Paul and James would say this subject is very close to the heart of God. Matter of fact, again, Romans 2:11 says, for God does not show favoritism. You think about our society, even back then, has always tolerated favoritism. You think about favoritism, does it happen in the church? Yeah, it does. Does it happen in schools? We tolerate favoritism, and what happens is there's not only fights in school, but I think the last one is in Ohio. Why did this young man bring a gun to school? He wasn't just being bullied. He was always on the outside. He was never anybody's favorite, so he took his anger out. There's fights in neighborhoods. There's bombings internationally. It's all around favoritism and choosing certain people. And I would say this has to be rooted out in my life. It has to be rooted out in your life. And today would be a good day to start that rooting process. Let's talk about roots of favoritism. Where did this come from? When you study the research that's out there determining the origin of prejudice, you know where it stems from the most? Mom and Dad. For instance, if children were to grow up in their home and mom and dad always berate someone because of their skin color, because of their social economic status or ethnicity or gender or even belief system, guess what? There's a strong possibility that the kids are going to pick that up and have that kind of discriminatory spirit. They're going to carry it into their hearts. And even some research shows that if the kids pick it up, guess what? As time goes on, the next generation, it'll be even more intense of a prejudice. So it comes from mom and dad, but also comes from our peer groups. We learned it in junior high and high school in those years. Peer pressure is so strong enough that at that age in junior high and high school that they'll do things and say things that he or she would never say to begin with. And in fact, it gets worse throughout your life. And so what happens is because of the origins of prejudice and how it's received and it's put in our minds and our hearts, therefore it takes something supernatural to root out the partiality in my life and in yours. See, when Jesus started his teaching ministry, he seized every opportunity to expose and transform the hearts of people with discriminatory or discrimination problems. I mean, Jesus went after that stuff like a heat-seeking missile. Here's an example. Jesus heals a nobody. It was a nobody. In Mark 3, the religious leaders, they were becoming very jealous about Jesus. He was very popular. And because of his popularity, they wanted to do something, come up with a plan to discredit Jesus in a public setting. And they thought one place that Jesus would be vulnerable is in regards to the Sabbath day observance. See, the 10th commandment stated that there was to be no work done on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees made up a whole bunch of extra biblical laws about working on the Sabbath. These laws were ridiculous, but people had to obey them. And the Pharisees thought that just maybe we'd get Jesus to disobey or to do something to not obey one of these rules. And so they hatched a plan. Some of the Pharisees says, I'm going to go out and I'm going to ask Jesus to come on this certain day to speak in the synagogue. And the other group decided that they were going to go find a handicapped person to sit right in the front row, that when Jesus would see him, he'd heal him. And if Jesus healed the man, it would be an exertion of his energy, and it'd be like he's working, and therefore the Pharisees would be able to discredit him. I mean, it was just a big sting operation. Now, it doesn't say this in Scripture, but if you see the whole plan shaping up, it's reported in Mark 3, it's a pretty clear picture. The Pharisees found this man with a deformed hand. They bring him in the meeting. They set him right down front. Jesus comes in. He's at the meeting. He's ready to give his talk. He stands up, and he sees this man right down there sitting in front. And then he sees the rest of the crowd. It's packed with religious leaders. And they're all leaning forward, just looking at this man with a deformed hand, with kind of a spirit of expectancy in the place, like, come on, Jesus, come on, reach out and heal this man, and we'll slam dunk you for a little technical Sabbath law violation. And the Bible records that Jesus sized this whole thing up, and he was furious. Matter of fact, it says that Jesus was grieved to the core over the hardness of the hearts that he sees. You know what he did? What Jesus did in that moment, he realized that these people, the religious people, they didn't care at all about this man with the deformed hand. They didn't care about his hand. They didn't care about his life. They didn't even care about his destiny. They were just using this guy. Jesus saw the hardness of their hearts. And he knew, if I'm going to heal this man, it's going to cost me a lot. So he asked him to stand, and he healed him right on the spot. And immediately, all these religious leaders stood up and said, Sabbath day violation. So what was Jesus doing? Why did Jesus heal the man if he knew it was going to cost him such? Jesus was saying to any thinking person, someone who has physical deformities matters. You don't embarrass someone who has a physical problem. You don't use them. You don't show lack of respect or honor for them. You show them respect, kindness, courtesy, and love. People with any kind of deformity matter. So here's another example. How about Jesus and women? One time Jesus and his disciples were out. They were traveling. It was hot. It was a dusty trip, and they're all thirsty and hungry. And as fate would have it, Jesus was at a well. When a woman came to get water, Jesus was there refreshing Jesus was there refreshing himself, and she came up. And Jesus took this woman seriously, but he spent a long time in deep conversation with her, and eventually ushered her into new life, a life filled with God's love. And the disciples turned back. They came back, and Jesus explained to them this unbelievable conversation that he had had with this woman. And his point was to his disciples, you know what? She matters. She really matters. She was a Samaritan woman, and she matters. You know what? Today in our society, there are still segments of our society that discount and devalue and diminish the value of women. But my friends, I would say that that is unacceptable to God. Because Jesus taught us that women matter just like men matter. And they are in no way less important to him or less valuable in his eyes. Now women, you can all say, Amen. All right. Here's the last one. How about religious favoritism? Religious favoritism is one of the most scariest forms of prejudice. Imagine someone who's far away from God a good portion of their life. But a miracle of miracle happens. They come to a relationship with Jesus Christ. And they have a brand new life on the merits of what Christ has done for them. So they humbly receive Christ, and they are adopted into the family of God. And now they are a growing Christian. 5 years later, they look down their noses at people who are still far from God. They start isolating themselves from people who aren't like them. When 5 years ago, they were in the same condition, but now they have the white hats on. They're the good guys. They're in the family of God. See, Jesus talked about that one day. He happens to be in a public place, and he's having conversation with people who are far from the Father. They're far from God. The religious leaders come by, and they show spiritual discrimination. They look down their noses at the people that Jesus was talking to. And then they look down their noses at Jesus. He's hanging out with this riffraff. He's hanging out with these people. How could you do that? We know that it was. He's gone to the house of sinners. He's hanging out with sinners. Jesus turns to them. He hears what he's saying, and he gives them the ministry. He teaches this ministry not one but 2 times. He tells 3 stories about this. He says, I want you guys to understand who matters to the Father. And then there's 3 remarkable stories he tells. Real quick. Jesus tells the story of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the wayward son. It's in Luke 15. And while he's telling these stories, the listeners realize that there's common themes here. And there's a reason why he's telling them and why the stories are laid out the way they are. In each of these stories, something of great value comes up missing, and whatever's missing really matters to somebody. See, a lost sheep really matters to the shepherd. To a woman who only had 10 coins to her name, that one coin meant a lot to her. And a dad who has 2 boys, and one who wanders way out there and is living, he wanders away and is living a self-destructive life, and the father's heart's ripped out. And as the religious leaders are listening to these stories, you know what? They understand what Jesus is saying. They say, Jesus is saying, these people are far from God. These people who are missing from the family of God, they really matter to God the Father. No matter how long they've been missing, no matter how far they've drifted away, no matter what condition they're in right now, they really matter. Like the sheep does to the shepherd, like the coin did to the woman, like the wayward son did to the dad. And then they see a second common theme here in the stories, and that is which is missing matters so much that it warrants an all-out search. So the shepherd goes to find the lost sheep. The woman goes to find the coin. And the dad strains his eyes looking down the road, trying to see his son returning home. So you know what Jesus is saying here? Jesus is saying to those religious leaders, I'm out here seeking these folks, and I'm trying to spark any little bit of interest in them. Because people who are far off from the Father, they matter so much to me. You want to understand the heartbeat of God? You want to understand the heartbeat of Jesus? It's found in this next statement in your sermon notes. Everyone matters to God. See, in each one of these three stories, when they retrieve it, the sheep, the coin, the son, there's great rejoicing. There's parties that happen. Luke 15:10 says, there is joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. See, friends, the day that you repented and you received Christ, there was a party thrown in heaven for you. I have to constantly remind myself every day that you never lock eyes with someone who does not matter to God. Every time you lock eyes with that waiter or waitress, the garbage man, the doorman, the neighbor, the Gen Xer, the grandpa and grandma in the rest home, or a minority person, or an illegal immigrant, or even a politician who doesn't vote or think like I do. Every single person you lock eyes with matters. They are only one prayer away from receiving Christ just as you have. They are people for whom Christ has died. So they deserve my respect, they deserve my honor, and they deserve my love. Let me finish with this. In the final hours of Jesus' life, he was hanging on the cross. You know the story between two thieves. One of the thieves realized that Jesus is about ready to take his last breath. So he reviewed his life. He was sick on how and the choices that he had made in his life. But it was too late. What are we going to do now? I mean, I can't clean up my act. I can't decide to walk straight. I can't even join a church or anything. All I can offer to God is a heart full of remorse. And all of a sudden, this thought sweeps over his mind for a fleeting moment. And he wonders to himself, what if the love of God is so high and so deep and so wide and also encompassing that he would wrap his arms around a fowler like me? What if someone like me, after all I've done, still mattered? So he turns to Jesus with a mustard seed-sized faith, and he says, is there any shot that you would remember someone like me when you come into your kingdom? And Jesus immediately says, today I will see you in paradise. It's like he said, Jesus is saying, in spite of all you've done, you still matter to me. Matter of fact, the day that you were born is when you mattered to me. You mattered to me when you were going the wrong direction. You mattered to me when you did your first heist. You mattered to me when you were arrested for the first time, when you got locked up, and when you were condemned to die. He was saying to him, there was never a moment when you stopped mattering to me. On the basis of your humility and your faith, I can say to you, welcome home. My friends, I end with this because this is such a picture of love that should melt us to the very core. It's a love of another kind. A love like that, when it takes root in our heart, should change the way I look at people and change the way you look at people. It should motivate me and you to be the first person to celebrate diversity, to be the first to reach out our hand to those who have once been diminished, the first person to always say to anybody you know, no matter what they're doing, no matter what they're going through, you matter to God. See, a faith that works means that I'm going to strive to be like God. Meaning that I'm not going to play favorites. Because everyone matters to God. Maybe you're on the other side of it. Maybe you have felt left out. And when you feel left out, it hurts. Maybe you're saying, where do I fit in? You know what? God has a place for you. You matter to God. You matter to me. You matter to this church. My only question as we finish is this. Do you know Him? Have you surrendered to Him? You know, and then the next commitment is, as a believer, is am I showing favor to these people and not these? We really have to ask ourselves that question. You know, and not play favorites. To root out those things that would cause me not to choose to love and care for those people in my life. I'm going to ask you to stand and sing number 334. I'd invite you, if you don't know the Lord, to make a step of faith today. Come towards Him, or maybe you want a place where you can say, I want this place, this church to be mine. I would encourage you to come as we sing number 334.